Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
And Russia's attitude towards NATO and Ukraine was exactly analogous to what our attitude would be to a Russian military base on the Rio Grande in Mexico. It would be, don't try that.
Yes.
And this is obvious. It's not subtle. It has been expressed for more than 30 years. But now we know, and more comes out and will come out. But Clinton approved this plan in 1994, that NATO would go east, including to Ukraine. Zbig Brzezinski laid it out in 1997 in an article which I always asserted was not Brzezinski's idea, but his way of telling his colleagues in the civilian sector, let's say, what was already decided. And that is that, yes, of course, we will go all the way to Ukraine. It became public in 2008 when George W. Bush Jr. Pushed at the Bucharest NATO summit the commitment to enlarge NATO to Ukraine. It became a cause of war in February 2014 when the U.S. conspired to overthrow a Ukrainian president that was against NATO enlargement, who wanted Ukraine to be neutral because that president understood, if you are Ukraine between East and West, try to keep your head down and stay neutral. And he understood that, so we had to overthrow him. And the U.S. did, and that's when the war started. So this was predictably a failure on every scenario.
Ending the war in Ukraine sooner rather than later, folks. Well, welcome back to More War Monday. The Rob Maness Show's live on Worldview Tube, our X Spaces simulcast, Truth Social Plus, Rumble, and YouTube. But that is the true context of the Russia-NATO-Ukraine war. NATO expansion was always our plan, to include Ukraine. And Russia was never going to accept that eventuality, ever. President Trump said during a campaign he could end the war in a day and just wants to stop the killing. And then he selected retired Army Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg as his peace envoy to that effort. General Kellogg does have a plan, but it seems it's going to take a lot longer to get Russia to agree with the proposal, which frankly seems almost like a non-starter on its face because Russia's recently rejected key parts of it already. The good news is we do have a president now that wants to achieve peace, and he's not constrained to one set of ideas, even from his own appointees, really. One of those voices with other ideas is my guest today, National Security Strategist David Pine. David's a former U.S. Army Combat Arms and a headquarters staff officer. He oversaw armament cooperation with the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas from 2000 to 2003. He currently serves as the president of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security and is a member, along with myself, of the Committee on the Present Danger of China. David, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show.
Hey, Rob. Great to be with you again.
You know, I wanted to show that clip just as a reminder to folks that Russia's concerns about it, what it calls its near abroad, Ukraine specifically, is the major part of that, go back 1,000 years or more. And this issue that is involving NATO and the United States is now 20 years old or more. I mean, we've been mucking around over there in the country of Ukraine, if it is even a country at this point, to be honest with you, I'll call it one, for more than 20 years. And it seems like we've been on the wrong side of this issue almost the entire time, with the exception of a very brief period when Trump was in office. And now he's back in office again. What am I missing here, David? I mean, the American people need to understand that this Ukraine issue is a Russia vital national interest, but it's not really a United States vital national.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been a supporter of Ukrainian independence since before Ukraine became independent. I was, if you go to my Twitter, America First Con page, it shows a picture of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Why? Not because I love Imperial Germany, although I think it world might have worked out a lot better if they'd won World War I, or at least there'd been a stalemate. But because I wanted to see the Soviet Union prevented from ever existing, along with Communist China and North Korea. And one of the key ways to do that, of course, was to continue to enforce the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and keep Ukraine as the linchpin of, European security from potential Russian aggression. That said, as you mentioned, Russia has been telling us at the top of their lungs, this is why we invaded Ukraine. It's not a war of Russian imperialism. It's a war to roll back NATO or U.S. imperialism into Ukraine, because Ukraine became a de facto member of NATO in 2021 with the signing of 2 strategic partnership agreements between the U.S. and Ukraine in August and November of that year. So, in fact, President Vladimir Putin of Russia said that, told Biden that if he were to simply issue a written guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO, that he would guarantee Russian forces would go back to their bases and not invade. So this has been a relatively easy crisis to solve from the beginning. Granted, the longer it's gone on, it's become a little bit more complicated. But as you noted, with my successive peace plans to end the war in 24 hours or within days, not months, that 2 articles that I wrote, one in August and one just last month. President Trump really has the ability to end this war at will, and he can end it, in the words of the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Russian Federation to the United Nations, in a day. Russia would comply with that. Trump has demonstrated the ability to do something that no other U.S. president has done, which is to terminate conflicts in a single day, almost at will, just as he did with the Israel-Gaza war, pressuring both sides to accept a ceasefire that was kind of a compromise agreement to restore peace and stability in the Middle East before he ever became president. He could do the same thing in Ukraine.
And his strategic goal of getting the hostages released has so far been successful in that effort. And his goal, obviously, in this effort with Ukraine and Russia, is to stop the killing as fast as possible. But the situation has changed dramatically, even from as far away as 6 months ago. I remember seeing General Kellogg talk about how not too long ago, how he supported Joe Biden's recent effort to give 2.7 more billion, or I think is the number, somewhere two plus something more billion in resources. Ukraine being part of NATO. Do I have that wrong, or is that accurate? I mean, because I don't
you're
think
absolutely
Russia's
right.
going to accept those aspects, right?
General Kellogg has been on the wrong side of the issue, continuously from the time that Russia invaded Ukraine until pretty recently. He made some concessions with his peace plan that he shared with President Trump in June of last year. But even as recently as November and December, he was cheering on, Biden and praising Biden for sending ATACMS missiles to target, engage in deep strikes into Russian territory, which President Putin himself stated could trigger World War III and a nuclear exchange. So, Kellogg was, I would say, a ill-considered choice, I think, to lead peace negotiations with Russia. And I don't even think that he's going to. I think, in some ways, he's almost a figurehead. From what I've heard, he hasn't picked up the phone to talk to the Russians at all. Trump has stated, and I think he's accurate, that, I guess peace talks have begun with Russia, but on a very low level, reportedly at the embassy level. The problem is Russia doesn't have an ambassador in the U.S. So if embassy level consultations are happening, they're either with a deputy ambassador or acting ambassador, I guess. They don't even have an acting ambassador to the U.S. currently, since their ambassador was withdrawn back in October. But likely with the Biden appointed, U.S. ambassador in Moscow. So it's very preliminary. Trump has made at least one threat that we know of against Putin, that if he doesn't come to the table soon, then there'll be added U.S. tariffs, taxes, and sanctions. The problem is, there's no peace plan there hasn't even been a phone call that we know of from the Trump administration to Russia at a mid or high level to begin those negotiations. Now, in Trump's defense, if this leaked peace plan is true, then we have a really, I think we have an achievable peace plan with one major exception that I talk about in my latest article, of course, Ukrainian demilitarization, and a robust timetable to accomplish that goal, which coincidentally lands on Russia's Victory Day, the 80th, in which they'll celebrate the 80th anniversary of their victory over Nazi Germany with the military parade. So I don't think that that end date for a peace deal is coincidental. I think Trump wants a win-win peace agreement, which is minimally acceptable to Russia, which is the only way peace will ever be achieved.
Yeah, because they're really in the driver's seat, aren't they? Here's one of the things I'm concerned about is I saw the president several days ago talking about the numbers of casualties, and the numbers that he was talking about on both sides didn't seem to track with what I've been following for quite some time now, and I don't follow the propaganda numbers that come out of each side. So I'm a little bit concerned that he's not getting good information, or maybe he's just talking about the information he's being given and understands it's something else. But Russia's in the driver's seat on this, aren't they, from a position of strength? And I'm sure he knows that. So where's the confusion at here? The Kellogg plan that I was able to piece together through your articles, talks about first steps of phone call between Trump and Putin, and President Trump just moments ago said that he was going to be talking to him. He wouldn't say when, but that they were in continuous talks. Not he and Putin, but the governments are of the United States. So, you think it'll be in the next few days?
I don't. No, I don't think that's it. It doesn't seem likely because, the Russian foreign ministry, the deputy foreign minister, stated that there's been no serious progress at all in terms of arranging a talk or even a phone call between President Trump and President Putin. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen very quickly, and there doesn't need to be any delay. He could pick the phone and say, hey, would Putin be willing to drop everything and take a call from me later today? And I think it would happen. So just because there's no progress yet doesn't mean there needs to be any progress, because that's something that can be done in an instant. You pick up the red phone in the White House, that's done in times of emergency, and there's going to be a call on the other end that will eventually get Putin on the phone. So, yeah. But I share your concerns entirely that, Trump has been fed misleading information from his neocon advisors, most likely Kellogg, perhaps Waltz as national security advisor as well. We don't really know. Rubio's taken on a much more reasonable line, so probably not from Rubio. But it could just be most likely Biden intel officials. There's a lot of Biden deep state dead-ender intel officials. There has been some widely publicized firings of, some senior FBI heads office heads, whatnot. We haven't really heard a lot of firings or dismissals within the deep state intel agencies. So, that could be it as well. It could be an acting DNI that is Biden appointed or someone like that that's feeding him this information. But, particularly disturbing was his claim that, Russia's lost 1 million dead in the wars thus far. In fact, my figures suggest that's 10 times higher than what Russia's actually lost. And the danger is if Trump believes that Russia's losing the war, then he may feel that he's in the catbird seat to strong arm them to accept terms that are entirely unacceptable to them that will cause the war to be prolonged indefinitely. But understanding Trump as I think I do, I think even if he were to make that mistake initially, he would course correct because he really is very sincere in his desire to end the war. My frustration, I think probably yours as well, is that he could end the war inside a week, and he's chosen to accept this extended 4 to 6 month timeline.
Yeah, it's kind of unusual for him to go slower rather than faster, as you talked about. And I'd like to see firings at DoD in the intelligence community under the DNI, as much as we're seeing it that DOJ is up to and the FBI. And I want to see more. I want to see it go deeper over there because there's a lot of dead weight that are just out there resisting. We already know they are. They're saying it. Well, we got to take a break, Dave. When we come back, we'll dive a little bit deeper into this Kellogg plan and how it contrasts with what you've been writing about and proposing here over the last couple of weeks. We'll be right back with David Pine on the Rob Maness Show.
Daniel, you were talking about Ukraine and misapprehensions, misinformation, literally, that Donald Trump may be being fed since he went back to the Oval Office. Actually, the cornflake heir, Keith Kellogg, seems weird that he could possibly be the Ukraine envoy, isn't it? I know you're saying that he's playing people off. Do you think where's he getting the information that he can leverage sanctions on Russia somehow in any deal over the proxy war on Russia through Ukraine when, as we know, Russia's done really well out of the sanctions, and the only sanctions, I understand it, are for uranium to U.S. nuclear power stations. That's the only sanction left to a Trump administration. I mean, clearly that's been seen as idiotic all around the world.
Well, I guess you could say that I've had the misfortune of doing foreign policy in the D.C. area for a couple of decades. And so I know that it's a circular argument. Anyone who speaks outside of the sort of generally accepted wisdom is considered, a freak. And that's how it was being there. There are very few people, and they can hurt you if you are. So Kellogg's a product of that. I mean, he's a product of that milieu, and he thinks like everyone else who thinks in that. But, he did this goofy piece with Fred Fleitz, who's an old line neocon, actually worked for John Bolton for quite some time. So they came up with this crazy article. I'm sure you remember it back in early 24, mid 24, whenever it was, about here's how we can do it. We're going to freeze the conflict for 100 days. And, and we're going to tell Putin, if you don't come to the table, we're going to sanction you. And we're going to tell Ukraine, if you don't come to the table, we're going to stop giving you weapons. And here's what's going to happen. It's completely bizarre completely devoid of reality approach. Sadly, well, that's probably why it was accepted in foreign policy circles in Washington. But when you are winning a war, you don't accept a ceasefire. That's just a fact. And when you have expended so much blood and treasure as Russia has, although quite a bit short from the million casualties that Trump claims, we can get to that later. But nevertheless, when you've expended so much and someone comes along and says, hey, you're winning, but can you stop fighting now? And by the way, Ukraine will only have a 10-year pause on NATO. And in the meantime, the West can go back to rearming Ukraine and getting it ready to fight again. Now, I think if Putin accepted a deal like that, he would probably, I would say rightly, he would be overthrown. Because if you really want to overthrow someone like Putin, get him to accept such a stupid and suicidal. We've been through Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. We've been through this whole thing before. There's absolutely no way this works. So how could you come to the table with an offer like this?
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking with national security strategist and former Army officer David Pine about his recent proposal for a peace plan for Ukraine and Russia. And David, that was Dan McNabb of the Ron Paul Liberty Report talking about General Kellogg and this plan that we have some of it, freezing the fight for 100 days. What's the purpose of that? I mean, I get calling for a ceasefire, everybody go back to your corners and settle down for, give it 3 days and then get to a peace table. I get that, but 100 days? What? Why start out that way?
Well, I hate to be in the position of defending the Kellogg plan, but there are certain elements that actually do make sense that are a big improvement from the Biden regime's non-strategy of fighting to the last Ukrainian until the last Ukrainian is killed and Russian forces can then overrun and annex the entire country at will. But I haven't heard of a 100-day ceasefire. I think I've studied the Kellogg plan, and maybe I missed that. But my understanding of the Kellogg plan is that they would pressure Russian Ukraine to accept a ceasefire. And as he mentioned, if Russia didn't do it, then they would threaten to, massively increase arms shipments to Ukraine, which is ridiculous because we don't have any weapons left to give them, and that's why there's $4 billion left in Ukraine aid that was never delivered because we literally had no weapons to further to draw down because it would have jeopardized, the minimum number of weapons we require for, to have a reasonable chance of being able to fight, let alone win a war against Russia or China directly. I think that the Kellogg plan didn't go nearly far enough. Certainly the 10-year or 20-year, even 20-year moratorium on Ukraine NATO membership is ridiculous. The U.S. has never had any interest in Ukraine joining NATO. It was a foolish idea from the start when Bush first proposed it in 2008. We've expanded NATO 83% from the territory that when the Cold War ended and Germany was united inside of NATO, we've expanded it territorially by 83%. We doubled the number of member states from 16 to 32. There's really no rational, reasonable national security strategist that thinks we need more strategic depth for NATO to counter Russia, particularly when Russia, was not a threat. It was not perceived as a threat when Ukraine was invaded by Russia, because our relations despite the Russian annexation of Crimea, our relations were pretty decent. But other provisions, primarily the Ukrainian kind of rearmament or massively increasing their military capabilities is really a huge non-starter with Russia. It's even possible that if we weren't to come to some compromise on that issue, that Russia might not even agree to a ceasefire, even a temporary ceasefire. I think they probably would, but it probably would not last very long if we were not to give ground on that term.
Yeah, this Kellogg plan fixes the number for the Ukrainian armed forces at what it is today, which is somewhere, I think, according to their official numbers, a little bit over 800,000. or close to 900,000, I should say. And that is significantly different than the Istanbul Agreement, I believe, and your proposal, too, right?
Well, yes. So Ukraine proposed a cap of 250,000 troops as part of the final iteration of the Istanbul Agreement on April 15th, 2022. So that's what they were willing to accept. So that should be the maximum number that is even considered in any peace agreement. Russia, of course, never gave. Actually, they were insisting on a cap of 50,000 in their original draft, and then increased that to 100,000, including National Guard troops in their final draft. So I mean, maybe we could compromise at 150, maybe even 200,000, which was basically their pre-war strength, but certainly nothing above 250,000. Yeah, Zelensky is claiming 80,000 troops. If you look at Wikipedia, which I did just to find some humor, they list the end strength of the Ukrainian active duty forces at about 1.4 million, and that's the army, just the Ukrainian army, whereas the Russian army is listed as 500,000. We know for a fact. I mean, we have receiving incessant reports, even from Biden regime media internationally, that some Ukrainian battalions can't put more than 2 infantrymen together, commanded by senior lieutenants, because they're at 10% end strength. They've been decimated, absolutely, completely decimated by Russian forces, artillery bombardments, airstrikes, drone strikes, missile strikes. So the idea that that Ukraine is outnumbering Russia by a factor of 1.5 to 1, when in fact Russia has probably twice as many troops in Ukraine itself, is really preposterous.
Yeah, I mean, even a low number says that Russia has 400,000 troops on the ground in Ukraine, and that's a low number.
It's actually likely 700,000.
Yeah, yeah. So that's very interesting. I think I like this idea about this peace conference with China being part of it. It brings at least a tenuous ally of Russia to the table that's on par with them. Do you think that will be acceptable to Russia?
Oh, I think Russia would love to have China at the peace table. I don't think we should invite anyone else, but I think it should be a negotiation between Russia and the U.S. I don't even think Ukraine should be at the table. I think we can negotiate a peace treaty for Ukraine on the best possible terms for them. There would be no value added whatsoever to have Ukraine at the peace table, because Zelensky has actually, he's banned, for 2.5 years now, he's banned any peace negotiations with Russia. He's refused to lift the ban. He's refused to lift the decree of September 2022. You would think, I mean, if he was at all interested in Trump's proposal for a ceasefire, let alone a peace deal, he would have lifted that. He would have said, yes, we want a peace, Ukraine wants peace, and here's the proof, I'm lifting the ban. And he hasn't done that. Instead, he's saying the only way that Ukraine will agree to a ceasefire is if Ukraine gets to join NATO pretty much immediately, or else if we get 200,000 NATO peacekeepers deployed in Ukraine, not in central Ukraine, he said, but at the front line. He wants 200,000 NATO peacekeepers, including U.S. troops, deployed to the front line in the Donbass region and along Kherson and Zaporizhia regions as well. So, I mean, the idea that he is supportive of peace is laughable, and I was sad to hear Trump say that. Clearly, he's being misinformed by his neocon advisors.
Yeah, that's been a lot of our concerns. That's why he needs to get his appointments at the Pentagon and in the intelligence community done as quickly as possible. Much deeper than beyond the top 3 players. We got to get some people that are actually supportive of his policies into action here to help those guys out. We got to take another break, Dave. When we come back, I want to dive into detail into your plan and go through each facet of it really quickly, so we can contrast that with what's on the table from the administration perspective so far that we know, and we don't know much, but we do have enough from General Kellogg and others that we can do a comparison. We'll be right back with David Pine on the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Is the government tracking you? Do they have access to all your data? Well, if you go to worldviewtalk.com, you'll find out about a cell phone company that, well, does not store your data. They don't do that. This is what they're known for. They don't store your data. You have privacy. You're not being tracked. That's why a lot of folks are turning to worldviewtalk.com. You'll find their prices are very competitive. All the details are there at worldviewtalk.com. Again, worldviewtalk.com. Oh, while you're there, not only do they have cell phones that aren't tracking you, you can find out about how to get a satellite phone. Should the whole system go down and you want to communicate with a family member or a loved one, you might want to have a satellite phone. Or how about their solar generators? They have great solar generators. Check them all out right now. Worldviewtalk.com, worldviewtalk.com.
Ukraine is we need to bring that war to a close because all Ukraine is doing now is destroying itself demographically. They're chewing up the next generation of manpower that they can't really replace right now. They don't have enough manpower. The Western defense base is pathetic, and you're not going to out-conventional war the Russian bear. And I would say a ugly peace is better than whatever their idea of an ideal war is.
Well, what is an ugly peace, though?
Meaning freeze the lines, straighten the lines, except let them have Crimea, let them keep Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, whatever. They need to. It is not certainly it's not the American taxpayers' obligation to spend another $100 billion in Ukraine when there's been significant corruption and really nothing to show for it.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and my guest today is National Security Strategist, former Army officer David Pine, who has his own proposal for peace between Ukraine and Russia that we'd love to get it in front of the president, and I'm sure the president will see pieces and parts all come together. And your ideas, David, have been in the mix for some time now. But let's go over these. What I like when I read your plan, here's the bottom line: is that it pays attention to both combatants' concerns, is what it appears to try to do. I haven't seen that from previous proposals vis-a-vis the Russian concerns. I don't know why that is. I suspect it's because there were 4 years Russia's the aggressor here, propaganda, complete propaganda. Not that there aren't the aggressor. I'm not making excuses for them. But President Putin has said many times that setting aside the vital national interest concerns of Russia didn't help prevent this war. And that's what they were. They were brushed aside. So that's one of the things I like about you. I mean, your first facet, yeah, we do a ceasefire like the Kellogg plan does, but the Ukraine pledges to go back to the pre-2019 Constitution and drop its goal to become a member of NATO. I mean, that gets right at the core issue for Russia, doesn't it?
It does, and it's really a shame that, of all the, most preeminent national security minds in America, not one of them had the courage to publish a peace plan kind of along the lines of my own, which, as you mentioned, took into Russia's concerns. It was, realistically achievable in terms of, where we are on the ground with, Russia on the verge of forcing a Ukrainian military collapse. And I think it was just out of fear that they didn't want to be called Russia appeasers, because that's what happened to me. When I published my peace plan in June of 2022 in the national interest, there were a few that said, oh, great plan. But the majority was, I got inundated with Ukrainian foul-mouthed emails denouncing me as a longtime Kremlin paid agent, all kinds of bizarre stuff. I got put on the Ukraine blacklist. So there was a price that I paid. Wasn't going to be asked to appear on Fox News, or I think Fox News has mellowed a lot. They probably would welcome what I have to say now because it's in vogue with Trump as president. But back then, in 2022, when Kellogg was all over Fox News saying that Russia was on the verge of defeat, Ukraine, all we needed to do was send a few more arms to Ukraine, and Russia would collapse like a house of cards, and just as Hitler claimed in 1941. That was never going to happen, because Russia's got 35 times larger, and it just really overmatches Ukraine in every way.
Yeah, and you heard Eric Prince there. That's who was in the clip at the beginning of the segment. Talk about how they're Crimea and Dansk and those three areas, that they're occupying right now. Nothing's going to really force them out of there, and nothing Ukraine can give away is going to be able to do that. But in your phase one, you also lay out that Ukraine gets to retain all its bilateral security guarantees that it's gotten previously and can join the European Union. I mean, that's a balanced approach right there for the first part of this, and that's what I really haven't seen that from anybody else. So I guess I'm going to be called and have been a Putin's puppet too, because I think this is not a bad starting point. I mean, all these negotiations, these plans are just starting points anyway. And then number two. Ukraine's got to withdraw from the Kursk Oblast, of course, and then recognize Russia's control of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Maness, and Luhansk, based on the current lines and Crimea, right?
That's right. Yeah. Putin, of course, in his June 14th latest peace proposal said that there would be no ceasefire until Ukraine had withdrawn all its troops from all four regions along their constitutional borders. But I always took that as a kind of a negotiating tactic. I think he was frustrated with the fact that he was getting no response. He's been sitting at the peace table alone since April of 2022, after Biden vetoed the Istanbul Agreement, which was really would have been a stunning victory for Ukraine, mandating a full Russian withdrawal to their pre-war position, something the Biden administration claimed they wanted. But because it would have forced Ukraine to become a neutral country outside of NATO, it would have rolled back, our so-called liberal empire that Senator Hawley is used to refer to. To our sphere of influence, which essentially we've tried to push all the way to Russia's western frontier, and of course China's borders as well. Though we haven't really done anything. It's been a status quo situation, of course, with Taiwan and the Pacific, but primarily in Europe, we've really been aggressive and driving NATO eastward, trying to drive it 1,100 miles to the east. So I think Putin would be willing to, he's actually said so. He said that he'd be willing to accept the current lines of control as kind of a permanent border. And then Russia, high-level Russians have also said that Russia would be willing to withdraw from all of Kharkiv Oblast and Mykolaiv as well. They've got kind of half of an island is part of Mykolaiv. It's more like a peninsula, but it's part of Mykolaiv Oblast. So there's actually two oblasts that Russia said they'd be willing to withdraw from out of the 7 that they partially occupied or fully occupied.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the second part two is that Russia renounces all its claims on the Ukrainian controlled portions of those oblasts and withdraw all its troops from Kharkiv and Mykolaiv, as you said. And here's another thing, though. While guaranteeing Ukraine's territorial integrity, what do you think will convince the Ukrainians to trust them on that one? Because they basically have violated that promise based on what the Minsk agreement already, because of their national interest, obviously. Will there be any other hooks to?
Yeah, I think so. Russia didn't violate the Minsk Accords. It was Ukraine both Zelensky and his predecessor, that refused to implement them. In fact, as late as the 21st of February 2022, Putin gave a speech stating that any peace must be made on the basis of the Minsk II Accord. So that was really our last chance to grab Minsk II and say, we get to, Ukraine gets to keep control of 93% of its territory. Actually, that was Minsk, of course, would have been 96% because it would have included the 3% that were the independent Russian separatist republics, Luhansk and the Donetsk People's Republics. But I think that's something that that was a real missed chance. I think that when we Biden vetoed that, a lot of those terms are still on the table, thankfully, for Ukraine.
Yeah, they are. That's the interesting thing is those terms are on the table. If Zelensky will just drop his declaration of no negotiations, no peace negotiations. Now your plan calls for a 4-kilometer demilitarized zone policed by an international force. Who makes up the international force? Because I don't really think Americans have an appetite to be doing any peacekeeping at this point after 30 years of war.
Yeah, so Russia has repeatedly stated they want no foreign troops whatsoever in Ukraine, but I think they're really concerned about obviously U.S. or closely allied U.S. allied troops, such as from NATO countries and whatnot. So obviously, the UN is peacekeeping forces would not necessarily work out unless it's just neutral, non-aligned countries. OSCE also has NATO countries, including the U.S. So I think the non-aligned movement. So the non-aligned movement is 120 countries, mostly Africa and Asia. There's also some South American countries, some Central American countries that are involved. But essentially, under my proposal, it would be a force that's led by India. So India is, I guess it's considered non-aligned. The U.S. is certain, I think the U.S. and Russia have kind of been trying to compete for, to try to get India to align with them. And so I think India would be ideally suited to lead a peacekeeping force, if indeed a peacekeeping force is necessary to patrol a demilitarized zone. Because, as your viewers probably are aware, I don't think there are any peacekeepers that patrol the DMZ that separates North and South Korea. It's simply heavily militarized, and both sides have pretty much, with a few exceptions where North Korean troops have crossed over to murder U.S. Army officers and whatnot, they pretty much respected the DMZ without the need for peacekeepers. So I think the peacekeeper is an option. It's not a requirement for peace, but I understand Ukrainian concerns that Russia might not respect its territorial integrity in the future. My argument would be, when did Russia most respect Ukraine's territorial integrity? And that was the period from 1991 to 2014. And during 14 of those years, or I guess a little over 13 years, no, actually it was 14, President Putin was leader of Russia. So why would Russia have respected Ukraine's territorial integrity for 14 years? And the answer is because it remained in accordance with its Declaration of Independence and its constitution, permanently neutral outside of NATO. And so that is all this talk about the size of the Ukrainian military and its combat capabilities is really irrelevant, because all Ukraine needs to do is re-sign its treaty of friendship with Russia, and it needs to declare itself a permanently neutral power, and it needs to expel all NATO troops and bases, including CIA bases outside of Ukraine. And then it will have true security. And a lot of us, even the two of us, I think that think morally, mainly in military terms when it comes to achieving security. It's not really a natural thought that if you demilitarize by a larger power, that can bring security. But what people need to realize is that Putin only attacks when he feels threatened. The reason that Putin didn't attack one of his neighbors when Trump was president before, it's not because he feared Trump, but because he didn't fear Trump, because he knew that Trump had campaigned on peace with Russia, He knew that Trump was made comments about leaving NATO. So he knew that, if anything, Trump wanted to decrease the U.S. military involvement along Russia's borders. And that is the key to a lasting peace, because that's what Putin's trying to achieve, and he's wanting to achieve it not with a ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire, but with a permanent peace agreement that would, along the lines of my strategic framework agreement that I proposed in this article, achieve Russian integration into the security architecture of Europe.
Yeah, it's as you mentioned early on in the show, we got to go to another break, but I just want to get it out there again, is that Putin didn't start engaging in kinetic warfare until we, the United States and NATO, deposed a pro-Ukraine neutrality president, and that was at the end of that time period that you just talked about. So all of those ensuing years, for 14, 15 years, there was peace and no threat from President Putin. He was the president for those days. So we'll be right back with David Pine. We'll continue discussing his proposal, which I think has a lot of merit, a lot more merit than anything we've seen so far for the Trump administration to consider adopting. We'll be right back on More War Monday.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
So, a big part of the problem was Russia for many, many years, long before Putin said you could never have NATO involved with Ukraine. Now, they've said that that's been written in stone. And somewhere along the line, Biden said, no, they should be able to join NATO. Well, then Russia has somebody right on their doorstep, and I could understand their feeling about that. But there were a lot of mistakes made in that negotiation. And when I heard the way that Biden was negotiating, I said, you're going to end up in a war. And it turned out to be a very bad war. And it could escalate. That war could escalate to be much worse than it is right now.
They can never join NATO.
Well, my view is that it was always understood. In fact, I believe that they had a deal, and then Biden broke it. They had a deal which would have been a satisfactory deal to Ukraine and everybody else, but that Biden said, no, you have to be able to join NATO.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday. My guest is National Security Strategist David Pine. We're discussing his peace proposal between Ukraine and Russia. David, President Trump gets it. I mean, that was very recent. That was within the last week or so, that clip you saw there. He fully understands Russia's position, and it's not just today, but it's historical concerns and positions. So that gives me a lot of hope that when he gets laser focused on this thing, that we're going to be able to get to a deal and stop this killing very quickly. I think any ceasefire has got to be really closely connected to a plan to end the war, because as was said at the beginning of the show, if you're winning, you really don't want to agree to a ceasefire, quite frankly. And I believe that's where Putin sees himself and his armed forces, is that they're winning. So it's going to take a lot of negotiations to get him to come to the table. Now, two parts of your plan. One is the Ukrainian armed forces size, which I think is much more reasonable. And then Ukraine agrees to Russia's proposed limits on things like deep strike offensive systems, and those kind of things, and then relationships, full diplomatic relationships are being stated between the two countries, and sanctions are dropped. Any uniqueness to that, other than it adds for both sides, it takes away for both sides, which is a balance.
Yeah, I mean, looking through again, this was the biggest area of dispute, really the only remaining area of dispute that before the talks were torpedoed by Joe Biden and Boris Johnson, was the arms caps and the size caps for the Ukrainian military. And so I've gone over this repeatedly and come up with different formulas for how to do it. And with Russia as the victor, I initially proposed in a previous iteration of this peace plan that the caps would be closer to the Russian proposal. But really, I identified back in March 2022 in an article I wrote for the National Interest that Russia's real concern was with strike systems, offensive strike systems, missiles, combat drones, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, even to some extent long-range air defense systems, because they were all, in essence, or many of them were nuclear capable, including combat aircraft. We've seen F-16s delivered to Ukraine, which with very small, limited modifications could be equipped to carry U.S. B-61 nuclear bombs. And, people need to realize that the main reason that Russia views Ukraine, NATO and Ukraine as an existential threat is because they wanted to restore Ukraine's kind of nuclear buffer state status, because as a NATO member or even a country aligned with NATO, they fear at any moment they could see B-52s deployed to a border air base 300 miles from Moscow, giving them only 5 minutes of warning time before a U.S. decapitation first strike against the Kremlin. So that's why I think that we should agree to accept Russia's proposed limitations on all offensive strike systems. Now, other systems that I think are arguably more defensive, including tanks, tanks, ATGMs, air defense artillery, armored vehicles, anti-tank guns, auxiliary aircraft, reconnaissance drones, and auxiliary naval vessels. I think all of those we should pressure Russia to accept the Ukrainian cap. So I think this really tries to split the difference in a very even-handed way. We have to accept the Russian size limitations on our armed forces, but we can split the difference on the armaments, because what they're really worried about are offensive strike systems, again, many of which are potentially nuclear capable.
Yeah, and your plan adds to this agreement the United States aspect to it, and a NATO piece, withdrawing U.S. forces out of NATO countries that didn't exist before, 1999, but also redeploying our B-61 capability off of Western Europe and to our carriers in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific region, which is something that I've been calling for myself outside of any agreement. I think people that are reasonable, logical thinking folks understand we, the U.S., need to turn to the real adversary and make sure we're strong enough to maintain, keep ourselves from being attacked in the Pacific. And that's one step that would do it. I applaud that. I really do.
Yeah, elements of this agreement, as Dr. Peter Price stated when he first saw the December 2021 peace drafts, mutual security agreements that Russia submitted to the U.S. and NATO, he said in some ways these drafts are more favorable to U.S. national security interests than Russia's. Now, I wouldn't agree with that statement, but what I would agree with is that by and large, with the exception of three points in the Russian proposal, they are all in the U.S. national security interests. And, of course, none of the parts that I thought were unacceptable or had issues with were incorporated into this proposed U.S.-Russia strategic partnership agreement. But, just imagine how it would revolutionize our geopolitical situation if the U.S. and Russia, for example, were conducting joint military exercises not off the Chinese coast, but just anywhere in the world. You know, where we had improved our relations with Russia to kind of strategic partnership status. We were having joint military exercises. We were sharing technology on missile defense systems, you know, with the goal of maybe having a joint missile defense systems. We had a free trade agreement. We had broken off Russia and India from BRICS. You know, neutralized the Sino-Russian alliance. I mean, there's no amount of U.S. military spending that could buy us that much security, and that's what I'm trying to drill down is, you know, and get to the Trump administration at the highest levels, is that we have this opportunity, as you know, as Vivek Ramaswamy wrote an article with my assistance and co-authorship back in June of 2023, to transform a Ukraine peace deal into, you know, kind of a U.S.-Russian entente, similar to that between England and France before World War I. It's short of an alliance, but it's more than just a detente, you know, kind of agreement between enemies. It's establishing some, you know, it's ending the new Cold War, eliminating the Russian nuclear and conventional threat to the U.S. and Europe, foregoing the need for any U.S. defense commitments aside of, you know, for naval and naval forces and a nuclear umbrella over Europe, and enabling us to completely do the pivot to Asia, doubling the military forces we have facing China in terms of naval and nuclear forces. You know, we don't even have nuclear weapons in the Western Pacific or East Asia. You know, Bush took those out in '91. So essentially, you know, with the exception of a few TAC nukes on Trident IIs, on our, you know, our nuclear missile submarines, we don't have a theater nuclear capability at all. So, you know, China, if China invades Taiwan, even if they don't attack U.S. bases, they can use the threat of their theater nuclear supremacy to, you know, essentially use escalation dominance to pressure us not to intervene. And you know, I don't, you know, I think whether we should intervene militarily is a big question in the event China does that. But I wanted to, you know, increase maximize the deterrence factor, so they never do it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're on the same page. Well, we've got some hands up in the audience. We're coming to the end of the show. I want to take a question real quick. Go ahead, Shell, our host over in the space.
We have Shepherd of Truth, sir.
Thank you very much. I've been listening, Colonel, quite a few times. I got a quick question. What is it going to take for the American people to lean into de-escalating things with Russia? And I go back to, and I'll frame this question just for this quickly. Putin did an interview with Tucker Carlson, I think, early last year. Mm-hmm. And I watched that several times. And he kept stating over and over how he wanted peace. He's used restraint in Ukraine. What's it going to take for the American people to lean into peace here, starting here?
Okay, that's a great question. David, go ahead.
Well, I think President Trump's, you know, he's mirroring the desires of the majority of the American people who, you know, voted to end the war in Ukraine. So I think he's moving forward. He has a deliberate plan on how to accomplish that. It's not as quick of a plan as I would have hoped for. It's not a mirror of the plans that I proposed. But if indeed it's the 100-day peace plan that was leaked, you know, and covered by Newsweek magazine just a week ago today, then I think it has a very realistic chance of achieving certainly a permanent ceasefire and very possibly a lasting peace deal with Russia. So I think your concerns are well justified. I do think Putin is very sincere in his desire for peace, despite the fact that he did invade Ukraine in violation of international law. He's been trying to end it. You know, the problem with a war is it takes both sides to end a war. Short of unconditional surrender, if Putin were to occupy all of Ukraine, he could end the war without Ukrainian participation or say so. But short of occupying Kyiv, which he easily could have done, you know, people forget that Russian forces encircled Kyiv within 3 to 5 days, and they only didn't take Kyiv because Putin ordered a halt of armored forces and columns along the road from Belarus to Kyiv that lasted a month, and then unilaterally withdrew Russian forces from all of northern Ukraine. They could retake Kyiv with, I wouldn't say ease, but they could certainly do it with as little as 150,000 troops, perhaps 250,000 troops, and they have the troops to do it. It's Putin that's refused the calls by Russian generals not to do so. But if these peace talks fall through, I see no reason why Putin would hold back and take Kyiv to end the war unilaterally.
Yeah, and just to answer the question real quick, we're at the end of our time. David, thank you for coming on today. We'll get you back as things progress, I'm sure. But I see the American people have leaned into this peace by electing Donald Trump. His existence as president of the United States is the American people speaking that this is baloney. It's time to way beyond time to end this war, and this plan. The reason I wanted to talk about it is that it helps bring the U.S. and Russia closer back to almost a friendship relationship instead of a enemy adversarial relationship. Well, David, thank you very much. We appreciate you, man. You guys can go find him on X, David Pine, AmCon First. And we will be back tomorrow with Sean Hendricks from Western North Carolina with an update for a full hour on what he's up to and what's going on with FEMA and Cameron Henry, the acting director over there. We'll see you tomorrow on Transition Tuesday.